He was a man obsessed with the sun, a man who believed that the right and proper life for a human being was a life lived outdoors, preferably in the tropics, naked if possible. Only then could a person achieve their true and fullest potential. He was a dreamer, but with a practical side. When it came to what a naked, sun-worshipping man or woman of nature might eat, he'd given that quite a bit of thought, too.
God has made for us the perfect food in the shape of a human head.
Coconuts. He's talking about coconuts.
The brain, the most noble organ in humans, derives its energy from sunlight through the roots of the hair rather than the dirty digestive organs. Coconut, with a spherical, furry shell, most resembles the human head.
Can a German nudist and his small band of followers create an island utopia in the middle of the Pacific and somehow subsist entirely on coconuts?
The coconut fruit grows closest to the sun and therefore is the most perfect food for a man or a woman. God created coconuts based on the human head.
Huh, well, since you put it that way.
And make out a small beam of light against the mirror.
Truly weird stuff.
August Engelhardt. Was he a genius, a madman, or proof that first cousins maybe shouldn't marry and have children? Let's go with all of the above, and we might as well start at the beginning. August Engelhardt was born in Nuremberg, Germany on November 27, 1877. His parents, Friedrich and Charlotte, were first cousins, and August was the middle child of four. It wasn't a happy childhood. According to Engelhardt's own diary, both parents were physically abusive. He was only 17 years old in 1894 when his mother died. His father passed away just 2 years later. Throw in the oppressively overcast Nuremberg skies. From October to March, the sun rarely showed its face. And young August had plenty of reason to feel miserable. With his parents dead and no one to stop him, August left Erlangen University, where he was studying chemistry and physics, to become a pharmacy assistant. It turned out to be a fateful move. The job ignited a passion for health in Engelhardt. Germany at that time was deep in a movement called Lebensreform. It translates as life reform. It was a rejection of industrialization and urbanization, a call to return to a simpler life, one in harmony with nature. Lebensreformers preached a message of vegetarianism, naturism, aka nudism, natural medicine, and even dance as a form of expression. It all made sense to August Engelhardt. A life spent in the sunshine and fresh air was surely the best antidote to the grinding grayness of industrial Nuremberg. Engelhardt was all in. He was particularly inspired by a book published in 1877 called Fruit and Bread, A Scientific Diet. It preached the virtues of a purely fruitarian diet, which really appealed to Engelhardt since he was already a budding cocovore.
Coconuts grow at the highest point of the palm, facing the sun and our luminous Lord God. It gives us water, milk, coconut oil, and nutritious pulp. Unique in nature, it provides humankind with the element of selenium. From its fibers, one wove mats, roofs, and ropes. From its trunk, one built furniture and entire houses. From its pit, one produced oil to drive away the darkness and to anoint the skin, even the hollowed out empty shell made an excellent vessel from which one could manufacture bowls, spoons, tankards, indeed, even buttons. Burning the empty shell finally was not only far superior to burning traditional firewood, but also an excellent means of keeping away mosquitoes and flies with its smoke. In short, the coconut was perfect.
The difference between the young, orphaned August Engelhardt and every other person with a budding obsession was this: a sizable inheritance. Engelhardt's late father had owned a factory that made paints and varnish, and the deaths of he and his wife had left their children extremely well provided for. Never underestimate the power of money to fertilize even the weirdest and wildest of dreams. Engelhardt's sudden wealth made it possible for him to pour himself into his new lifestyle. In 1898, Engelhardt and a fellow believer named August Bethman published a book called A Carefree Future, the New Gospel, glimpses into the depth and distance, for the selection of mankind, for the reflection of all, for consideration and stimulation. Now, don't let that catchy title fool you. This was a manifesto packed with essays on the optimal natural lifestyle, sermons, really, almost. It was also stuffed with poems, and most of those were about coconuts. The poems had titles like The Coconut Spirit, How to Become a Coconut, and Mother Coconut.
Coconut, noble princess and benevolent mother of man, likeness of God you are, and divinity in the shape of a plant.
Hey, this one's good too.
O men, is there a finer calling than to be this palm's worthy son? How to become it? Let me tell you, there is only one way, the way of fact. And the fact is to eat only coconuts. Then you will be penetrated with coconut spirit, and your appearance will be happy, and you will exhale joy, peace, strength, and beauty.
In the autumn of 1899, Engelhardt left his pharmacy job in Nuremberg for the Harz Mountains in northern Germany. He joined the Naturopathic Institute Jungborn. Jungborn means fountain of youth. This was a kind of commune devoted to natural living, founded by the brothers Adolf and Rudolf Just. Nudists and vegetarians, the Just brothers' philosophy was that human salvation could only be gained by living like the animals do, in harmony with nature. No cars, no modern housing, no chemicals of any kind, whether for farming or medicine. No processed foods. The Just recommended tossing both mattresses and shoes in favor of sleeping and walking on the bare earth. And these ideas aligned with Engelhardt's, who went ham on Jungborn and was soon traveling the region and giving lectures on the natural life. This is also when he began preaching the good news about coconuts being the perfect food.
Whosoever subsided solely on the coconut would become godly, would become immortal.
Audiences received this message with frank skepticism and outright mockery. Now, we are talking about the highlands of Bavaria, after all, and rooms filled with sensible and pragmatic German farmers who made no secret of the fact that they thought August Engelhardt was a kook, as nutty as the coconuts he was forever yammering on about. And Jungborn had its problems. For one, nudity at that time in Germany was seen as immoral, and it also happened to be illegal. Adolf Just practiced as a naturopath, which many then and now considered pure quackery, and he was under constant scrutiny for shunning medical science in favor of folk cures and fruits and nuts. It seemed to Engelhardt that life in Europe was too rigid and too conventional for a man like himself, a man who wanted to live as nature intended. He was 26 years old the summer of 1902 when he left Germany, boarding a mail steamer called Empire, bound for what we now call Sri Lanka. August Engelhardt disembarked on the island of New Guinea, then part of the German Empire. Sunshine, blue water, bluer skies, and wild, untamed nature as far as the eye could see. And you know what else he saw? Coconut palms. Engelhardt knew he had found his place. On October 2nd, 1902, Engelhardt traded some of the cash from his inheritance for a 185-acre coconut and banana plantation that he purchased from a German holding company. Engelhardt's new home was located on the coral island of Kabakon, which is now part of Papua New Guinea. It was the paradise he'd imagined, his very own tropical kingdom. He stripped off his clothes and set about making his perfect natural life. But Kabakon wasn't a deserted island. There were at least 40 people already living there. Melanesians, the people indigenous to the island chains that stretched from New Guinea to Fiji. What they made of this pale-skinned, shaggy-headed, blonde stranger who'd suddenly appeared in their midst is anyone's guess. What we do know is that they avoided him as best as they could, vanishing into the brush when he appeared at the edge of a lagoon or in a stand of coconut trees. Engelhardt was alone, but not lonely. He'd packed almost a library's worth of books, and he'd invited others he'd met in the Jungborn movement to join him in paradise. He was confident they'd come, and in the meantime, he kept busy constructing a 3-room thatched hut that he called the Palm Temple. He went for long swims in the warm Pacific, and of course, he admired and harvested his beloved coconuts, all the while dreaming of the utopia to come, his Sonnenarden, the Order of the Sun. Engelhardt's co-author, August Bethman, arrived on the island, and the two men began writing impassioned essays about the perfection of their Sonnenarden, about the glories of life under the Pacific sun. They paid newspapers back in Germany to print those advertorials. Come to Kabakon, they urged. Clothing would not be required, except for a loincloth to greet the occasional visitor. They assured their fellow Germans that there was nothing to fear in the tropics, not even malaria, what with the coconut being an even more effective treatment for it than quinine. And why shouldn't it be, thundered Engelhardt? From its pristine white flesh to its magically thirst-quenching water, anyone could see that to eat coconut was...
to eat God himself.
In a relatively short time, more than a dozen young Germans were like, count me in. No more stuffy woolen clothing. No more shaving. No more shoes. No more cold, dark, seemingly endless winters. But males only, please. Engelhardt was either terrified of women or rabidly resentful of them, or both, as is sometimes the case with certain men. The record's a little unclear, and it's worth remembering that Engelhardt was abused by both parents. That trauma and the resulting damage may just have left him too wounded, too guarded for any kind of, intimacy with another person. Engelhardt's standards for who might join him on the island were high. Candidates had to be of noble and excellent character, with 2 written recommendations from respected community members who were known to Engelhardt. Transport to the island was to be at their own expense. That was $250, which was worth nearly $10,000 back then. Clearly, only men of means would make the cut for Engelhardt's Order of the Sun. And one more thing. Each man had to confirm that he understood that all members must lead a permanent, naked life on the island. And surprisingly, there were takers. Germany in that Victorian age was bound by so many rules of etiquette and polite behavior, stiff and repressed, with lives so rigidly choreographed that one could just about see the end from the very beginning. But here was a chance to occupy a new Eden, to be free in every imaginable way. Freedom is never really free, though, and no one learned that faster than Engelhardt's first companion, August Bethman. He wasn't on the island long when he began to have his doubts about the wisdom of Engelhardt's plan. When his wife, Anna Schwab, arrived, she took a good look around and was like, "What is this insanity?" This led to conflict between Engelhardt and Bethman, amped by the fact that Anna insisted her husband eat something besides coconut, for God's sake. When Bethman fell ill, probably malaria, Engelhardt blamed Anna for insisting that her husband pollute the purity of his diet. And before Bethman could board a steamer for his return to Germany, he died. A devastated Anna went to the governor of German New Guinea to plead her case. As she prepared to sail home, the governor ordered a temporary halt to all new immigrants to Kabakon. And again, Engelhardt was all alone in paradise, but only temporarily. The first new arrivals came on another mail ship, which dropped anchor in the lagoon. They were rowed ashore by a pair of sailors. Waiting to greet them was the chiseled and sun-bronzed August Engelhardt. He was lean and appeared fit with his mop of sun-bleached hair. These were the early days in Engelhardt's coconut-flavored paradise, and though he would never again present such a glowing portrait of robust good health, first impressions are important, and he made a hell of a first impression that day. Engelhardt looked like freedom personified. A fellow vegetarian and naturalist, his name was Heinrich Aukens, arrived on the island in 1903, already a true believer in sunshine and coconuts. He left his clothing on the dock and dove into this new world with gusto. He was just 24 years old and in good health, but maybe the abrupt shift in diet was more than his system could handle. Heinrich developed a fever. There were no doctors or medications to be had, and even if there were, these disciples of the sun would have rejected any modern medicine as a kind of industrial poison. So Heinrich languished and grew weaker and weaker until just 6 weeks after arriving on Kabakon, he died. Next to disembark was a concert violinist and pianist from Berlin, a man named Max Litzel. Litzel had been very successful as a musician and conductor. People lined up for the chance to hear the highly regarded Litzel Orchestra. But the business side of his art had drained him of joy. He was weary, burned out, ready to make a change. He was thrilled by what he saw when he arrived on the island of Kabakon. Gazing about, he announced that he was convinced that anyone lucky enough to come to the island would surely stay there forever. He had no idea how true those words would prove to be. Litzel and Engelhardt were kindred spirits. The two men hit it off almost immediately. There was just one problem. In the same way that Engelhardt brought a most beloved piece of his old life with him to the island, that library of more than 1,200 books, Litzel had done the same, except what he brought was music. Engelhardt didn't object to music so much as he did to Litzel's taste in music. And maybe, even more than that, Engelhardt didn't like the fact that he wasn't the sole focus of Litzel's attention. Everything on the island was, as Engelhardt declared, but Litzel's music was the one thing that was outside his rule. Litzel was a genius, and in this way, Engelhardt's superior. Engelhardt wanted to be the only thing his acolytes worshipped. Among Litzel's favorite composers were two that Engelhardt absolutely despised: Gaetano Donizetti and Georges Bizet. This is the sort of thing where you typically go, yeah, to each their own. But when you're living on a mostly empty tropical island with only a few other naked Germans for company, listening to music you hate over and over might be enough to drive you insane. The day came when it all blew up, and the two men got into a ferocious argument. Litzel was a sensitive soul to begin with, and weeks of near sunstroke and a diet of nothing but coconut had strained his patience and good manners to the breaking point. Ugly, hateful words flew back and forth. Litzel felt attacked, misunderstood, and deeply hurt. He couldn't bear to be in the same space as Engelhardt. So he approached the crew of a cutter ship carrying Wesleyan missionaries, which just happened to be anchored in the lagoon, and asked permission to sleep aboard for just one night. And that night, as Litzel snored on the deck, the ship dragged its anchor and began to drift on the tides toward the open sea. When the crew realized, they tried to adjust, but the cross currents were too strong. It was simply too dangerous to try to return to the lagoon. 2 days, the captain said, which doesn't sound like much. 2 days at sea, and then an easy return to the island. Litzel might have been hurt and angry with Engelhardt, but none of that changed his commitment to the principles of the Sonnenarden. He was now a man of nature, a man of the sun. So, for the 2 days he spent at sea, Litzel refused any shelter. He also refused to eat anything but fresh fruit, preferably coconut, please. The problem was, there was no fresh fruit aboard the ship, and none floating in the ocean, just waiting to be grabbed. The weather took a bad turn, and for those 2 days, a starving Litzel shivered on the deck in a cold, wet wind. By the time the ship was able to safely return to the lagoon, Litzel was delirious with fever. The missionaries carried him ashore, where he only grew sicker. 1 week later, Max Litzel died. August Engelhardt buried the musician right next to Heinrich Alkens. The missionaries were troubled by all they had witnessed, troubled by Engelhardt's behavior. It seemed to them that Litzel had died for no good reason, that what they were seeing was not some utopian ideal, but complete madness. They suggested to Engelhardt that perhaps what would be best was for them to take Litzel's body and return it to his family in Germany. Engelhardt lost it. Who were these weak-minded creatures to dare to tell him how to run his new Garden of Eden?
I own this island. It is mine to do as I see fit. Begone now. I forbid you to ever approach the lagoon of Cahoqua again.
The missionaries did as they were told, but with heavy hearts. Whatever this island was, they could see nothing but tragedy ahead. Engelhardt stomped off to the seclusion of his palm temple. His days soon fell back into their familiar rhythms. The sun, the sea, the coconuts. Months went by, and then a year, and then another. Engelhardt never wavered from his pure and natural life, but the silence was oppressive now instead of peaceful. Even he couldn't block from his mind the tragic deaths of his first 2 apostles. The other potential converts never materialized. Before ever leaving Germany, they'd been persuaded that Engelhardt's paradise was teeming with fever and overrun by cannibals. They'd been convinced that the only place Engelhardt might lead them to was the grave. The other thing that gave people pause about joining Engelhardt's coconut cult was the very real fear of headhunters. You cannot even imagine how obsessed people were back then with headhunters. Not the kind that blow up your phone and email with exciting job opportunities in sales and chemical engineering. These headhunters were the kind that wanted to kill you and keep your head as a trophy. From Butte, Montana to Philadelphia to Rome, Paris, and London, newspapers carried breathless stories about what they called the most fearsome savages. Like this one, printed in the Sun Journal, April 1910.
The headhunters are an exceedingly dangerous tribe. They have a religious superstition that they cannot harvest their rice until they get a number of human heads. They cannot even marry until they get at least one head, and the man who gets the greatest number is made the chief until some other one surpasses him. To get these heads, they will murder most anyone, and a white man's head is more highly prized than any other. Each headman carries an axe with a concave blade that fits the neck. With one sweep of this weapon, they can easily sever a head clear from the body. On the reverse side of the axe is a spike, on which the head is brought home. The ghastly trophy is then put into a native liquor called Barcy until it is well decayed, and then this liquor is drunk. This is supposed to impart to the drinker the intelligence of the victim.
It didn't help Engelhardt that headhunting had been practiced by the people of Melanesia, including right there on the island of New Guinea. In fact, in 1901, a missionary stumbled across a cache of 10,000 human skulls in a longhouse on an island not far from Kabakon. And more, the Marindanum people of New Guinea were famous, or maybe infamous, for their headhunting. They believed that the skull contained the whole mystical life force. And even though they weren't cannibals in the strictest sense, they did consume the flesh of those they killed for ceremonial reasons. Stories like this circulated around Europe and in Germany, where Engelhardt's much hoped for recruits heard every grisly word. Only the truest believers in nudism, sunshine, and coconuts were willing to risk having their heads lopped off. And it turned out that number was a very small one. Though a few did trickle in over the next few years. Each arrived with the fire of the true believer. Each initially basked in the endless sun, splashed in the warm sea, gobbled the fresh coconut. But the climate proved harsher than they dreamed. A diet of mostly fruit turned out to be not nearly as satisfying or healthy as they'd been led to expect. They grew weaker and weaker, and many died. The lucky ones lived, but in the grip of malaria, a disease the coconut had not been able to protect them from, as promised. Even August Engelhardt succumbed, though he did manage to recover. The spell was broken, though, and the surviving members, sickly and malnourished, told Engelhardt that they were finished. The idealism and hope that had drawn them to the island was no match for the hardship they found there. They were returning home to Germany. Engelhardt was outraged and blamed them for every bit of their own illness. They had deviated from the rules, eating the tropical fruits that grew everywhere on the island, when he had told them time and time again that it was the coconut and the coconut alone that must be eaten. All those other fruits, dripping in sweetness, had done nothing but corrupt their bodies and steal their vitality. Of course, not every coconut cult member died of malnutrition or fever. There was a drowning or two, a handful of cases of sunstroke, and don't laugh, one person who died after being struck on the head by a falling coconut. It all amounted to the same thing. August Engelhardt, standing alone on the sand, a mad atom ruling over a lonesome tropical Eden. And though he owned the land he stood on, the German government owned the island. And now they were paying very close attention to Engelhardt and his coconut cult. As Engelhardt's health continued to deteriorate mentally as well as physically, the government did not interfere with him, but it banned any new acolytes from joining Engelhardt, who continued to make his way from his thatched hut to the sea to the cocoa palms. He was hollow-eyed and emaciated, with sores and lesions and ulcers covering his legs and body. Tourists who'd heard of the coconut-crazed madman of Kabakon Island made detours, sometimes lengthy ones, just to catch a glimpse and maybe a photo of the legendary hermit. He was never hostile, just waved off any kind of medical attention as unnecessary, because his faith in the coconut never, ever wavered.
Living such a life would in time render a man so immune that sickness could be overcome, and he would conquer death and be as gods.
Well, here's the problem with a diet consisting entirely of coconut. It's completely unsustainable. That fact has probably already occurred to you. The average coconut packs a whopping 1,400 calories, and a lot of that is saturated fat. But coconut lacks both adequate amounts of protein and vitamin C. Coconut water is delicious and acts like a mild diuretic. The more you drink, the more you have to pee. And that puts you at risk for dehydration. Plus, too much potassium, and there's a lot in a coconut, can be dangerous for your heart. Engelhardt, though, knew all the tricks when it came to coconuts. The young green nuts contain mostly water and a layer of a jelly-like substance. Very nice, very easy to get at with a machete or a sharp rock. Then there's the sprouting stage. When a coconut puts out a new shoot, it begins feeding off the flesh inside, turning all those reserves of saturated fat into sugar. Crack that nut open, and instead of water, you'll find a spongy texture like a cake. Load it with carbs and great for fast energy. Once the nuts mature and take on their hairy resemblance to the human head, the water has transformed into a thicker, oilier substance that isn't as great for quenching thirst, and the jelly has become the snow-white meat we all know from cakes and pies and candy bars. Coconut fun facts. Coconut trees tend to grow best along the edges of tropical islands, and unlike other trees, bend toward the wind and not away from it. And the reason for this is super, super cool. Coconut palms want to drop their seeds, the coconuts themselves, as close to the water as possible. And that allows the seeds to travel to a new life on another island carried by the ocean currents. Try to remember this in case you're ever stranded on a lonely tropical island. Moving in the direction the coconut palms are bending will lead you to the shoreline instead of deeper into the jungle. And if you ever see a coconut floating in the ocean, give it a salute. The hard shell and the natural buoyancy of the coconut allows it to survive for a year in the water. You could fish it out, crack it open, and enjoy it. Or you could leave it alone and let it go, drifting for maybe thousands of miles at sea before landing in its new home on some distant shore. You can kind of see why August Engelhardt was so impressed by the coconut. It's just too bad that a diet of nothing but coconut left the man with a host of preventable diseases, including beriberi, pellagra, and scurvy. Oh, if only my Italian grandmother were here to tell you all about what happens when you don't finish your meatballs. So, real quick, beriberi comes from a thiamine deficiency and causes nerve degeneration. Pellagra comes from a niacin deficiency and causes both diarrhea and dementia. Scurvy comes from a vitamin C deficiency and causes internal bleeding, slow wound healing, sores, and bloody gums with tooth loss. Engelhardt had all of those symptoms and many more. When he became so weak and emaciated that he could no longer resist, he was hauled into a hospital in Papua New Guinea. The minute he was strong enough, though, he escaped and made his way back to Royal Palm, his 3-room hut on Kabakon. There he scratched out treatise after treatise on natural medicine, studying the islanders as well as himself. And those native islanders who'd kept their distance from the strange white man who refused to wear clothing and would eat nothing but coconuts, something they knew better than to try, watched his decline with alarm. It wasn't his skeletal frame that worried them. It was his behavior. He would spend his days prowling the island, preaching loudly in German to the trees, shaking his withered fists at the sky. They feared that he'd been overtaken by demons. Something needed to be done. So, one afternoon, a canoe paddled by 2 Melanesian men rowed into the harbor at Herbert Shohei, which served as the capital of German New Guinea. It was a modest little town, home to a post office and a handful of German bureaucrats tasked with managing the colony for the German Empire. The 2 native men explained, that something terrible was happening to the coconut man on Kabakon. And would the authorities please do something? Would they please come and take him away? Easier said than done. Finding himself dragged back to the hospital at Herbert Shohei under the care of a doctor whose diagnosis included the phrase paranoid wreck did not suit August Engelhardt. Refused all food and medical care, and Engelhardt somehow managed to slip away. Back he went to his coconut kingdom, and there he stubbornly remained until the outbreak of World War I in 1914. It was early in that war that German New Guinea was captured by the Australian Naval and Military Expedition Force. Bet you didn't see that coming. Engelhardt, alone and focused on cultivating plants with healing properties, suddenly found himself a prisoner of war. But not for long, because after they shipped him off to an internment camp, the Australians were like, wait a damn minute, what even is this crackpot? They released him in less than a year, and Engelhardt returned to his thatch hut on Kabakon. He began sending plant specimens to the botanic gardens of Brisbane and Sydney. He took up watercolors, some of which survived his death and might still be out there in the world somewhere. One of these days, an Engelhardt painting will probably show up on Antiques Roadshow, and the experts will have a good chuckle at the backstory of the artist, the kooky coconut man of Kabakon. There are multiple stories about how the coconut king, August Engelhardt, died. One version has him going on a hunger strike and dropping dead in late 1904 aboard a German government ship as it steamed away from Herbert Shohei. Another story has him dying where he stood on his beach on Kabakon and being laid to rest wrapped in a German flag. Yet another story insists he died in May 1919 and was buried in the Inabwe Cemetery on the Duke of York Islands. No grave can be found, but that might be down more to the island getting pounded during World War I than any coconut conspiracy theory. It's this last version that seems most likely. Engelhardt passing away at age 44, his body racked by malnutrition and rheumatism, his skin pocked with ulcers, his mental health in tatters. The last known photo of Engelhardt shows a scrawny, sinewy, bearded man, his arms and legs thin as sticks. It's estimated he weighed no more than 66 pounds. At the time of his death, Engelhardt's plantation on Kabakon was considered worthless. The land fell under the ownership of the Australian government. Engelhardt might have been forgotten. After all, he didn't leave much of a legacy behind. But for a writer who discovered the nudist coconut prophet and saved him from obscurity, the author, Christian Krott, turned Engelhardt's story into an award-winning satirical novel called Imperium. The book came out in 2012, and for a brief moment, the internet resurrected Engelhardt's sandy old bones, and he had a bit of a moment. Today, if you Google coconut cult, you'll find that's the name of a company making probiotic coconut yogurt. These folks are almost as evangelical about the power of the coconut as August Engelhardt. But if they have an opinion on whether or not you should be wearing clothes when you eat it, they've kept that to themselves. Celebrities from Gwyneth Paltrow and Angelina Jolie to Emma Stone and Mandy Moore swear by coconut oil for their hair, skin, gargling, cooking. Engelhardt would be proud. Maybe he is. Maybe he's been reincarnated as Dr. Bruce Fife, founder of the Coconut Research Center in Colorado. Fife established the Coconut Research Center to make information about the many remarkable health benefits of coconut available to the public. Fife's books include The Coconut Oil Miracle, Coconut Cures, and The Coconut Ketogenic Diet.
The coconut can be viewed as nature's medicine chest. The products derived from it, meat, oil, milk, and water, can be used to nourish the body, prevent disease, heal injuries, and overcome sickness. Many of the common health problems we encounter today can be prevented or alleviated by using the coconut.
Now, who does that sound like?
The coconut is the philosopher's stone. What are universities in comparison to such a lifestyle?
Next time on True Weird Stuff, he claims to be a prophet, claims to have all the answers, where we came from, what happens to us after we die. And how does he know all this? Well, he met an alien in the crater of a dormant volcano. An alien who says humanity is one giant experiment. Meet the messenger on the next True Weird Stuff.
And special thanks to Don Morgan for his help with this episode. So, Sherry, when you started talking about this, all I could think about was the Baroness. And the episode that we did earlier, they were Germans as well, weren't they? Who decided they would go out of this tropical island?
They were, and they were kind of all sort of contemporaries. It was this, so, Germany at this time, this was, the Victorian era. People were like really repressed and uptight. And Germany was not, the democratic republic that we know today. Germany was an empire with a queen.
Right.
And it was a very different country pre-World War I and pre-World War II than the one that we know. And there were a lot of Germans, especially with some money, because Engelhardt had money. The difference between August Engelhardt and a random kook on the street is money. Because once you get money, it legitimizes some of your craziness. Does it not? Have we not seen that play out a million times?
Seriously.
So Germans who had some wealth, who maybe leaned toward a little more of a bohemian lifestyle, it speaks volumes for the long German winter that there was this craze for, tropical sunshine and nudity. But I first encountered August Engelhardt in passing when we were working on The Baroness. And I had the same reaction you did. I'm like, wait a damn cotton pick a minute here. There's another island with another kooky German hermit on it.
And what the other ones, they were nudists too, or near nudists. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what are the chances? And then, I'm reading about August Engelhardt, and I was like, I set it aside. I was like, I got to write a whole story for this dude, for my muse, Don Morgan, to voice as August Engelhardt. And speaking of Don Morgan, he's here with us right now, ladies and gentlemen. Make him feel welcome.
Thank you. Yes, I am here. I'm putting the lime in the coconut.
So anybody who has listened to any True Weird Stuff episodes over the past year, you've heard Don an awful lot, and you usually are really despicable characters, and you do it really well.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's Jerry's giving me these parts, I don't know something about me.
we had you playing I'm like, Max, I've got this police chief, and I think your friend Don could do it. Max, I've got this hard-bitten journalist. I think your friend Don could do it. And then I called Max one day and said, your friend Don, how would he feel about playing a racist sex cult leader?
Sure.
I mean, a really racist, really perverse, bigamous sex cult leader.
Oh, man.
And that episode is called Unholy City. And so Max checked with Don, and Don's like, well, if you'll tell people I'm not really like that.
No.
It's only voice acting.
No.
Well, I love it because I've listened to old-time radio my whole life. I grew up in the 60s. I used to buy LPs, records that had old-time radio on it. Things like macabre and suspense, that sort of thing.
That's kind of the neat thing about podcasts is because it's kind of a revisit to that era of radio where you were telling stories on the radio.
Yes, this podcast is very much like this podcast could be broadcast back in 1940.
Well, that was, it's so fun, Don, that you say that, because when we're in we just hit our 2-year True Weird Stuff birthday. And when we first started making this, Max and I, our day jobs are in radio. We're radio people. And it's, we already have a job where we sit and shoot the breeze. Do you know what I mean? We didn't want to do a podcast like that. And we wanted to do something that had a little more structure to it. And Max is not only a broadcaster and an audio producer, he's an actor. And so Max was the one who kind of encapsulated it. We'd done about half a dozen episodes in our first year. And he said, this is kind of like an old radio drama. Like, I feel like everything I know how to do and love to do comes together for this podcast. And we hadn't really thought about it that way. But yeah, we're radio people who brought like a radio sensibility to this. And then as we discovered people like you who are incredibly talented voice actors who've never done voice acting. And it's so much fun. And then that really gave me as a writer so much more to play with, because then I could let you, these are all true stories. And when you hear, with very few exceptions, and we always flag them, when you hear a character speaking, those are their words taken from interviews and trial transcripts and police reports and autobiographies or whatever, right? However we got it. And so we could bring a character like August Engelhardt to life by letting August Engelhardt speak for himself.
I'm amazed at the amount of research that you do to find all of these stories and these strange, esoteric, and insane people throughout history. Where do you have a secret database?
What happens a lot, and sometimes there are stories that I don't want to do on the podcast because I feel like, well, doesn't everybody know about? Like, we did a pair of episodes on the New Jersey Pine Barrens, and one of them included the Jersey Devil, and I was like, yeah, but doesn't everybody know about the Jersey Devil? And Max goes, what? I didn't. Well, if there's a cryptid that Max doesn't know about, then it must be a pretty obscure cryptid. So what ends up happening is I'll be working on one story done, and I'll catch something that's tangential, that's off to the side, and I can't even describe it other than this feeling of like, and as soon as I feel that feeling, I flag it and then come back to it. And there are some, like a lot of the episodes that I wrote for you, because I write a lot specifically for you. A lot of the episodes I write for you, I can't even describe what the research or writing process is like. It just flows. It's like I can write a whole episode for you in a day, where I might spend a week or two or even a month on something else. Because when you can hear that character come to life in your head, suddenly you know how to tell their story in a different way.
Anytime you run across in history a flim-flam man, please give me a call and write it up.
You just have the ability. You have a beautiful voice, but you also, your voice, some people sound super contemporary, like they sound really, really modern. And they can't, even when you give them the dialogue from another time, Max knows what I'm talking about.
Right.
It sounds like a contemporary person cosplaying, a Wild West outlaw. But you have the ability, Don, for whatever reason, to travel through time and fit wherever you land. Your voice just, you were great as Curtis Springer, the Flim Flam man who created the town of Zizix. And he was 1930s, 1940s.
Right, yeah.
I love that guy.
Oh, I love that guy too. But you were great as Thomas Dewey in Cokie and Lucky. But I can send you back.
Him, and he sounds that way. He's the most well-spoken. He has a radio voice.
Yeah.
Oh, what a character. But we can also send you back 200 years to an island, take away your clothes, and give you nothing but coconut.
That's right.
I was going to. Bridget swears by coconut oil. I have bought. She'll go to the store and buy coconut oil. Well, what section of the grocery store is that in? So I'm always asking. The other thing is, when we started this, you were talking about sleeping on the ground, coconuts, no processed foods, thatched huts. My God, it's Gilligan's Island.
It is really.
Right? Wasn't the professor always making stuff out of coconuts? The coconut radio, the coconut phone.
Yeah, didn't he make a shortwave radio out of a coconut?
Yeah.
That's one August makes. I mean, Don,
So this thing of being of strange diets has gone on since the beginning of time, I guess, where people get on some dietary kick and lose themselves in it.
If there's one thing that we can tell you from working on True Weird Stuff, it's that whatever you think you just invented, the ancient Egyptians got there first. And any joy that you experience has been shat upon by the Puritans. These are the two great truths.
That's right. Anything that's wrong in the country, it's the Puritans that came across. Yeah, they're the ones that did it.
So Don, because you do so many parts in these episodes, and you see so many of these stories, are you not like astounded by just by people, like full stop, just the crap that people get up to and get away with?
Surely that's the dark recesses and the strange weirdos and all that are interesting. It's always been the case. I've always loved that stuff, so it's a great deal of fun, you know.
Sherry and I always did. We just didn't have an outlet for it.
Oh yeah, it really got to the point. I can't do most of this. Like I've done some of these kinds of things on the regular Bob and Sherry show, but there's not enough time. And people are squeamish, you know. Oh my God, we're eating the flesh of the dead because we think it's medicine, and suddenly people are calling the radio station and complaining. Blah, blah, blah. But you need more time to tell some of these stories, I think.
This story reminds me of like old EC comics with headhunters and running around and a desert island and suspicious things going on. The guy getting washed out to sea and not. This was a famous musician.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he refused to eat anything but the coconut and sleep on the deck
him his
with
life.
no clothes.
But you can kind of see he was really successful, but my guess is he wasn't just playing the band. He was the leader of the band and probably did all the business stuff and was successful and got burned out. You can see where the idea of living on a tropical island had great appeal for him.
And also charismatic people like August Engelhardt, even when, and you've played a bunch of these guys now,
you have.
Don. They all have something in common, which Curtis Springer did not. Curtis Springer was not a pervert. This Isaacs guy, he at least was not a pervert. A lot of these guys are like, whoa. I think that August Engelhardt was in love with Max Litzel. Seriously, I think he was in love with Max Litzel and was hurt that that he wasn't the sun and stars in Litzel's universe, and that Litzel knew that he didn't like Georges Bizet or whatever. I mean, you want to talk about some high cotton problems, not liking certain French musicians, and that Max would not relent felt like a betrayal. Engelhardt never had a relationship with a woman, which is not, evidence that you're gay. But I think that whatever was going on with August Engelhardt, and he may have been what today we might call an incel or a person who's asexual. I think that he had taken all of those feelings and cravings for human intimacy and warmth and companionship, and I think he projected those onto Max Litzel, who no one person can endure that. And the fact that we're all naked, starving to death on coconuts and arguing over Donizetti's as a composer, it's so crazy you can't believe it really happened. And yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. That really is an explanation for all that. That certainly does make sense.
And
I can see him winding up his life all alone on the island with just a coconut and a face painted on it, naming it Wilson.
Wilson, exactly.
He was in his 40s when he died, Sherry?
He was only 46. Yeah, he was so young. Well, he got there when he was so young, too.
Yeah.
Like, So it's really hard to take stuff out of, because to me, everything is part of the story. And one great reason this podcast exists is because the people in my life, Don, got so tired of me following them around going, no, wait, but there's one more thing. It's really cool that you have to hear.
I have a bit of information about the coconut you must understand.
Oh my God. I am the worst info dumper, every detail, right? It's hard to take stuff out of the story. And if I submit it myself to a professional consultant, they would probably cut these episodes to ribbons. And the whole episode would be, oh my God, there's this guy on this island who didn't have pants and he died of coconuts next week, right? But one of the things that I didn't go into much detail on was the abuse that August and his siblings suffered at the hands of their parents. Apparently, they were pretty monstrous, and there were witnesses, because these were people, the father owned a factory. They weren't, they weren't peak, bourgeoisie, but they had money and there were household servants. And so things were seen. They were terrible to their children for whatever reason. I don't know. That nobody thought to ask, I guess. And so by the time that they died, and he was young, he was in college when they died. By the time they died, he was a hot mess. And so you take a kid who's a hot mess and you make him independently wealthy, and he begins drifting, and he gets kind of vacuumed up in this natural lifestyle movement. And, one thing leads to the next, and he has the means to form his own Garden of Eden. There are a lot of people like that walking all around us every day who don't have the means to go off and chase that. So I think that he is that most interesting example of where extreme opportunity meets extreme thinking. And you saw the same thing in the character you played in Unholy City and in Welcome to Zysix. These are people that were given enough power and enough resources to spin their fantasies into reality to a certain point.
Yeah. And if you have a chance, listen to those episodes, because Don does masterful jobs in all of those with the voicing stuff that he does. And
so, well, here's a question for you, Don. It's something that Max and I talk about a lot with these stories. Where do you see yourself in that? Because we do a lot of I like to tell women's stories, forgotten women's stories too, and I think, God, it must have been so hard. We told one story, the Stagecoach Bandit. Remember, Max? Mm-hmm. I mean, she's out in the middle of the Arizona desert, living by her wits. Doesn't have a nickel to her name. Falls in line with this kind of silver miner who maybe is a good guy, maybe isn't a good guy. It's hard to tell. Murky. And they end up robbing a stagecoach. I'm pretty soft. I don't know that I could do what some of these women did. But you always want to put yourself in there, and you think, could I take my children to a public hanging? Could I have worked in a Wild West brothel as a saloon girl? Could I live by my wits in the desert? So as you embody some of these characters, do you ever find yourself going, oh, I can see how that happened?
Well, I definitely could with the Zysix guy. I just loved that guy. He seemed to have a good heart, although he was a total flim-flam. I mean, he's a total fraud and making all these promises that were not true, but
selling government land. He's on government land and going, hey, I'm selling this to you, that sort of thing. He did enough in that episode, if you listen to it, he did enough good that you go, well, he's not a total crook.
Not a total crook.
I'm like you,
and I love big bowls of ice cream, not the little bowls like you imagine, but these great big bowls of ice cream with lots of scoops, just what you want.
He knew what the people wanted.
It is entertaining to see what it's like to become one of these people, and particularly to not have to do it, not have to suffer the consequences.
Anybody listen to any of these podcasts? Your wife, anybody that's had any comment about what you're doing?
Sam, he's done
Sam.
some voice on the podcast. He does. Yes, what I like about this podcast so much is not so much when it gets into the kind of like what's the genre called, true murder type of thing.
True crime.
True crime. But is when it goes into these areas that remind me of old black and white movies, horror movies, because I grew up watching all those horror movies. And like this with headhunters and such, it's just it's the kind of thing that I've always read H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe and that sort of thing. So when it gets eerie and spooky, and the Max, you throw in the sound effects, and that's what I love.
That's what I love too. We do some true crime. I try to stay away from a case where the people, a crime story where the people are still alive. I'm uncomfortable. I can't really articulate it. I'm uncomfortable with telling the story of someone who's still here or their family members are alive and grieving. Like, it feels weird to me, even though I consume that content as a listener. But I'm with you. I like the little unexpected nuggets. So, like everybody, I grew up thinking that headhunters were something off of goofy black and white movies and like fiction. And Beetlejuice, there's the headhunter dude in the waiting room of the afterlife in the movie Beetlejuice. I know there are artifacts, like shrunken head artifacts in museums around the world, but I didn't realize that there was a moment when humanity was obsessed with headhunters. Newspapers all around the country, in places where you were never going to bump into a headhunter, would print wire stories of these bands of roving headhunters in the other parts of the world. Now, whether or not headhunting was that big of a problem at any time in history is hard to say, because it was just sort of like a thing that caught fire. It went viral, to use our terms.
It's kind of like quicksand.
Yeah,
it sort of exists, but it wasn't as big a deal as we were led to believe.
You need to do an episode on quicksand.
Oh, I'm so, you know what? To this day, I can remember what you're supposed to do if you get into quicksand, but I barely, I can barely change the water filter in the refrigerator without having to watch a YouTube video. And there's quicksand in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. Heads up, everybody, if you're looking for a place
to get back to that.
to test your quicksand. But yeah, so I do have, I belong to one database that I pay for access to that gets me all sorts of fascinating little artifacts. And this fixation on headhunters, oh my gosh. But it kind of fits, right? It fits into that whole like racism. We're civilized white people who wear shoes and work at banks, and the primal savages in the unknown world. Like, it kind of fit that whole 19th century vibe. But yeah, people were obsessed with having their heads taken and shrunken. And I read
and shrunken. So how does the shrinking work?
Yeah.
How do you shrink a skull?
Hey, hang on. Let me check on Google.
Well, in the one thing that we included in the episode, first they would take the head and then they would ferment it in this alcohol, which would preserve the tissues. And then they would drink the alcohol to get the wisdom from the brain. Oh my God. But there were other cases where they hollowed out the contents of the skull. And In some cases, they removed the skin and put it over something else, and that's what made the head look shrunken. Apparently, Dom, when it comes to your headhunters, there's much variety.
Would you like to know? Would you like to know what the process is like?
Yeah.
Google has told us what you have to do is remove the skin first. You have to peel it from the skull.
Yeah.
Then the skin is boiled in hot water, often with herbs that contain tannins. Then you dry the head with hot sand and rocks, and you mold it so that it keeps its human features. Then the eyes and mouth are sewn shut. You've probably seen that in movies to prevent the soul of the deceased from escaping. And that is how that is how you shrink heads. And fortunately, in the 1930s, countries in South America outlawed the sale of human heads because apparently it was a big business back then. And then they went, cocoa leaves, cocaine. Hey, we can make money another way.
Well, that big business part. So I read in one, I can't remember what country it was from, but I read one where the headhunters, in quotes, themselves figured out that it was big business and then went hunting heads to sell them, which is why we had to outlaw the sale, because we created a market for shrunken human heads.
Of course.
Unintended consequences.
Yes.
Of course we did.
Now, I know a lot of you free market capitalists are like, and why not? If people want a shrunken head, let the market decide.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's just, and in all of these old stories, there are so many themes that run through. August Engelhardt, look what his story shows us. It shows us that developed world versus the undeveloped world, colonialism, war, imperialism, the what would become like a fad that would, well, it's still sweeping us, that would sweep the world for 200 years of, you are what you eat. And all of these like homeopathic remedies and natural health practices. All of that is in August Engelhardt's story. And it's
Become
just amazing.
the coconut.
Become the coconut. When the thing that, Don, the thing that made me go, ooh, this is a Don Morgan story. One of the first things I read about August Engelhardt was him saying, here's how you know it's the perfect food. It's shaped like a human head. I went, okay, I'm in. I'm in. Whatever is coming next is bound to be awesome. But so now people followed him, like really accomplished, successful people that were significantly older and have more world experience. Tell me that the idea that the coconut is what God meant for us to eat because it looks and is shaped like the human head isn't exactly what would come out of the mind of a troubled teenager.
That's the way magic works as well. So much of it is that it's like sympathetic if it's similar.
As a child, and when I was probably about 5 or 6, my mother gave me coconut and I got sick from it. And I didn't, to this day, I won't like if it's something with, didn't Hostess have one of those cupcakes that had coconut? Snowballs.
Sure.
Yeah, I couldn't eat that. I couldn't eat any of that. The thought of it was just awful. So I eat to this day, I just no to the coconut.
There was a coconut bar in the early 60s when I was a little kid that used to be able to get at the YMCA from the vending machine. And it was a small bar and it had 3 stripes of color down the middle of it. It was all coconut and it had just been stained in the middle of it. And it was so sweet. I used to get them all the time. I love a coconut. I'm thinking of taking off my clothes.
There he goes.
Well, Max already has, so please be comfortable.
It's method acting. There you go.
The coconut is kind of amazing when you think about it, right? Like all of the life stages of the coconut provide a different kind of nutrition. And then did you know that coconuts could bob around in the ocean for more than a year and be perfectly able to sprout, grow, and be eaten?
It's amazing.
They are kind of magical. And nature is so splendiferous because the coconut trees alone in growing toward the wind, I mean, that is nature, the imperative to cast your seed into the future. That is like, we're all going to end up getting undressed and being coconut nuts, Don, because like think about how powerful that is. The coconut, it did to August Engelhardt symbolize the life force. Everything about the coconut is life and resiliency and, overcoming the odds and the elements. Like, and it is shaped like a human head. Like you can kind of see, how we got here. And then, so Germany, the Guinea Islands they belong to the German Empire pre-World War I, and then Australia gets them. And now, of course, when you say Papua New Guinea to someone, they're not thinking of August Engelhardt and the coconut cult. They're thinking of Margaret Mead, the great anthropologist.
Oh, that's right.
They're thinking of this pristine natural incubator for life. And he just sort of is a little tiny footnote in that beautiful part of the world.
Just think how much better off he would have been if he would have allowed himself the cheat day. So he could have the cheat day and eat something else, and then he wouldn't have gotten so sick. See?
Like a
little
fish.
piece of fish, perhaps.
Yeah, just a little something, some KFC, something.
A fish and a little bit of citrus, and he might not have. I mean, he had all the diseases of malnutrition.
Yeah.
He was, for the last people that reported seeing him alive on his island, they were appalled. He looked like a walking hairy skeleton. He was just, 66 pounds for a fully grown man. And the sores that would not heal, like the last decade or so of his life must have been terrible for him.
And why didn't he put it together?
Why didn't he?
That diet is doing this to him.
He was in some sort of insanity. I mean, he had to be wrapped in some kind of an insanity where the idea of what he thought should happen and what was really happened were two different things.
What's that saying, Max? The map in the ground did not agree
match
for him.
It did not match. No, that's true.
I think you always have to remember that, one of the truths about people is that sometimes we get kind of frozen or stuck at an age where trauma has happened. And all I could think about, I spent so much time with August Engelhardt in Germany and then in the Pacific, that all I could think was he was stuck at about age 15 because a lot of the way that he reacted to any kind of pushback was this very petulant, fine, I didn't ask to be born, door slam kind of energy. And I think if you're stuck in that place, maybe you double down on your beliefs, like this coconut is all I need, even when all of the evidence is to the contrary. I mean, don't you remember being 15 where your parents or your teacher could be telling you point blank, this is going to lead you to a life of despair.
Yeah.
But you were just so committed.
And it did. Yeah, they were right. I'll agree with you there.
I mean, what do you think, Don?
Yeah, doubling down is kind of a human thing. I do like the idea of the trauma.
Yeah, I think there's something
holding on to the trauma and responding to the trauma, and not having other ways to work through it, and it led to erratic behavior that you just double down on.
And he didn't really have anybody. Like his relationships with his siblings just sort of evaporated. His parents were gone. There doesn't seem to be, I couldn't really find. He was alone in the world. He was orphaned in college and alone in the world after that. He didn't really have anybody to kind of check his impulses or challenge his impulses. He was He was a hurt, banged up kid with a shit ton of money. And
how did they make
here we
money?
are.
How did they make their money? Was it varnish? Was it
The father owned a paint factory, like a paint and varnish factory.
and maybe he breathed in too much of the fumes.
Oh, listen,
will
that's very
happen.
possible.
You know?
Lead paint. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, listen, our parents and grandparents were snacking on lead paint while they were watching cartoons. So why not August Engelhardt, right?
They didn't even have dipping sauce.
They just eating, they're raw dogging that lead paint. So, but Don, this is one of the problems with, this is one of the problems that I have just in general in life. Like, you can show me just the worst person ever, and I'm over here going, yeah, but
She always
What made him?
You don't think that's ever led to any problems in your life, do you, Sherry?
on my third husband. But like we did an episode on now some of these people are irredeemable, like Georgia Tan, the baby broker.
Oh, yeah.
Who trafficked all those human babies
terrible.
and just ran oh my God, she's a monster. She's in hell right now serving tea. But others like the serial killer Nanny Doss, who poisoned all but one of her husbands and handful of her kids as well.
The giggling grandmother.
The giggling grandma, she suffered a traumatic brain injury in mid-childhood that was never treated. And it never occurred to anyone that the dramatic personality changes and behavioral changes that followed were connected. So while you cannot be poisoning your husbands, I certainly haven't, y'all. I'm on my third. The other two are alive.
We should.
Yeah,
Good news.
you
I
can-
wanted to clarify that for anybody who didn't know.
yeah. While you can't do that, like, isn't there a part of you that can go, yes, she absolutely needed to be stopped and face the consequences. But what about that terrible accident that she never really got any medical care for? Is anybody looking at that? And the stagecoach bandit. Don, she was 9 years old when her own father trafficked her into a whorehouse. Might we at least take that into consideration as we arrest her for robbing a stagecoach?
Sure, surely. I agree 100%. I mean, it's like not that it doesn't excuse, but it's just natural to try to. Let me say this. I think that like storytelling has developed from where it used to be in movies and such to where you can't just have, it becomes a stereotype if you just have an evil person who is just evil because he's evil and there's no backstory to it. To build a backstory is to make a human character, right. And all humans have a backstory.
And to know that backstory is to see your own reflection in a kind of a mirror. Because when we understand how people's lives can walk them down the path to a point where they make this terrible and fateful decision, you see yourself in some of that. Like you see there, but for the grace, right? And we do two things as human beings that are strange to me because they're contradictory. They completely cancel each other out. On the one hand, we believe the people of the past were much more virtuous, hardworking, good, decent, honest, restrained, kind, and godly than we are today. And at the same time, we think the people of the past were much more savage and ignorant and primitive and didn't know what we know today. So in this, how can both of those things be true? Because people are not any less virtuous today than they were then. People were terrible then. People are terrible now. People were wonderful then. People are wonderful now. We're just people. But when we categorize the people of the past that way, it lets us off the hook. And we don't have to stop and consider, like, what are we doing? Right? Like we say things like, I would never take my children and pack a picnic and go to a public hanging. Well, no, we don't do that anymore. But we do other things that the people of the future, if there are any of them, are going to go, I would never let my 8-year-old have social media or a smartphone or whatever, right? We're constantly in casting judgment on each other. But when we really peel back and we look at who these people were and what motivated them, now you're looking in a mirror and you're seeing there but for the grace, right? And I want to ask you, what kind of a person would you like to play next? Because you've been a bad guy, but you haven't been a violent guy. What kind of person would you like to play next?
Let's see now. Yeah, a pirate would be fun.
Oh, I have some good pirate stories.
Oh, I'd love a pirate. Do you have any undead characters in your pocket?
Like a zombie? There's
pity the poor zombie. How do they develop? Become this way?
There's a notorious story that I don't want to do and do want to do at the same time. Max will know it. It's a father he's a family annihilator. He murdered his entire family on their cold, snowy, gray, desolate farmstead on Christmas Day. Yeah. And he almost got away with it too, but those meddling kids, right? And I'm sort of fascinated by those family annihilator stories. So is Max, like John List.
John List, yeah.
We're sort of obsessed with that flavor of true crime. But then to write that, because it's one thing to read it.
You have to go into it.
It's another thing to be the person that takes that axe handle and brutalizes my own 6-year-old kid. So I haven't wanted to go there. But you'd rather play something creepy than something bloody.
Yeah.
You want to be
I don't
a
mind.
creepy dude.
Yeah, because
and a lot of emotion would be good.
A character like John List wouldn't be fun to play because he was very flat. He was very he had very opaque. I mean, he just was So the guy that started Zyzix,
The huckster preacher is always good.
I have an episode coming up that one of our listeners requested about oh my God, what a hapless ne'er-do-well this guy was. He tried so hard to be an outlaw and he failed miserably, but then destiny had something else in store for him, and that's all I'm going to say because it's unfreaking believable.
And I'll just tell you, Don has a limit on time.
Yeah, we have to let him go.
So.
You're just so good at the ringmaster, the con artist, the flim flam guy, the preacher,
Ooh, a
and
circus
the
guy, Sherry.
Yeah. Oh, I got some bad circus folks. I got some real bad circus folks. Some real bad characters who would do anything to sell tickets to the big top. Anything. Okay, so I'll find one of those for you, and it's true weird stuff. So if I can find a true-ish kind of zombie, you can be an undead dude.
We'll have the zombie backstory.
Because Don Morgan, you are the wind beneath my wings. You're my muse.
Thank you for joining us for this, Don. It's great to have you on.
This is so much fun to do. I just love true, weird stuff.
Thank you all so much for listening. Next week, we're going to go inside the world's largest UFO-based religion. And you're not going to freaking believe what that's all about. And that's on the next True Weird Stuff.
And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, hit the plus button in the top right corner, and now it helps an independent podcast like ours to get discovered. And we really appreciate it if you subscribe, rate, and review True Weird Stuff.
Hit our website, trueweirdstuff.com, for show notes and photos and videos when we have it, and bonus content. Everything True Weird is waiting for you at trueweirdstuff.com.
And follow True Weird Stuff on Instagram.
True Weird Stuff is a Now Media production. Our executive producer is Anthony Garcia. The show is written and hosted by me, Sherry Lynch, along with my deeply weird director, Max Sweeten. Our equally odd producer is Carrie Bowser. Additional production by the mysterious Stephen Call. Our digital witch and social media cult leader is Heather Furr. Original graphics by Kevin Nash. Original artworks by Olivia Axland. True Weird original music composed and performed by Jack Griffin and Zane Nash. Copyright 2025 Now Media. All rights reserved. All wrongs remembered.